Most people spend their entire lives running from things that never happened. They run from shadows cast on the walls of their own minds and call it prudence, responsibility, common sense. They think they are being careful. But Carl Jung understood something colder. The fear that paralyzes you does not live in the future. It lives inside you, disguised as the future. And while you believe you are running away from the world, you are merely running in circles around a part of yourself you have refused to look at. In the next few hours, you will realize that almost everything you have called fear until today was, in truth, a message. A dirty, poorly written message, delivered by a messenger you never had the courage to listen to. And when this message is finally deciphered, something in you will no longer be able to return to the old way of existing. The first mistake is believing that fear is a reaction to what happens. It is not. Fear is a reaction to what your mind constructs about what happens. You are not afraid of the phone ringing. You are afraid of the story you tell yourself about who might be on the other end. You are not afraid of someone's silence. You are afraid of the meaning you project onto that silence. It is not the event that paralyzes you. It is the narrative. Notice how almost all suffering happens before the fact. You anticipate rejection weeks before any real rejection. You imagine dismissal in surgical detail before any formal conversation. You rehearse the abandonment of a loved one in late-night thoughts while they sleep beside you with no intention of leaving. It is not the world that hurts you. It is the film you project onto the world, with yourself as both the screenwriter and the victim. Jung used to say with an almost scientific coldness that the unconscious does not clearly distinguish between what is real and what is vividly imagined. A thought-up threat triggers the same body, the same sweat, the same tachycardia as a lived threat. You are spending adrenaline on battles that never happened. You are aging from the inside out for fear of things that might never arrive, and yet, when someone asks you the reason for your exhaustion, you answer, "It's just life." It is not life. It is the silent expenditure of being at war with ghosts inside your own skull. Here is the painful inversion. Most believe they suffer because reality is harsh. But Jung looked at the structure of the psyche and saw something else. People suffer because reality is ambiguous, and the human mind hates a vacuum. Faced with what it does not know, it does not wait. It invents. And among all possible fictions, it chooses the most painful one, because anticipated pain gives the illusion of control. If you have already suffered in the rehearsal, you imagine you will suffer less at the premiere. It never works. You have only suffered twice. It is not that you are weak. It is that you were trained to anticipate catastrophes as if that were a form of intelligence. They called it maturity, realism, being grounded. It is none of that. It is the unconscious using your imagination as an instrument of torture. A part of you turned dread into routine and named this routine responsibility. And as long as you think the problem is out there, you will continue to serve, day after day, a fear that feeds exclusively on the raw material that comes from you. That is why changing cities, jobs, partners, or social circles rarely resolves it. You take the screenwriter with you. And the screenwriter does not change the scenery. He changes the costume. If fear is not born out there, one must ask where it truly comes from. And this is where Jung delivers the silent blow. Fear, in its most persistent form, is the visible face of something you have refused to see within yourself. It is a reflection, a mirror placed inside that projects the image outward, making you believe you are looking at the world when you are merely looking at your own internal walls. Jung called this region the shadow, but the word shadow has been so repeated in books and catchphrases that it has lost its density. Translate it without embellishment. Shadow is everything you had to bury to be accepted. Your anger when they said anger is ugly. Your ambition when they said ambition is arrogance. Your desire when they said desire is impure. Your sadness when they said sadness is weakness. Every censored emotion was thrown into a basement inside you, and things thrown into the basement do not die. They rot in silence, and they leak. Fear is one of these leaks. When you fear being abandoned, you are often just staring at the child who was once abandoned within you and was never comforted. When you fear failing in public, you are hearing, beneath the noise of the world, the ancient voice of someone who made you feel insufficient. When you fear being exposed, You fear that they will discover what you yourself did not have the courage to accept about yourself. The fear of another's gaze is always, at heart, the fear of your own gaze. And here is the cruel antithesis. You think you are afraid of what others might do to you. You are not. You are afraid of what the existence of others will reveal about you. Someone indifferent hurts you not because their indifference is powerful. They hurt you because their indifference confirms an old verdict you have already signed against yourself. When you believe, in the basement, that you are not enough, any cold look feels like a sentence. When you believe you are disposable, any delay in a response feels like proof. The other person merely pulls the trigger on a gun that you yourself loaded. That is why persistent fear does not vanish with breathing techniques, with positive affirmations, or with gratitude lists stuck to the mirror. You can take deep breaths all day long. As long as the basement remains locked, each breath only serves to briefly dilute a pressure that will return with interest. Not because the technique is false, but because it is treating the smoke while the fire remains alive, exactly where no one wants to enter. And it is at this exact point, when you begin to suspect that the problem is not the world, that your life splits in two. On one side, the version that continues to explain itself, to justify itself, to mask its exhaustion. On the other, the version that begins to look inward, knowing it will have to see things it would rather not have seen. It is the beginning of a process that Jung called individuation. It is nothing more than stopping the lies you tell yourself about who you really are. That is why I prepared the Código do Despertar for you. It is not motivation. It is not a collection of pretty phrases to use as a wallpaper. It is an internal map based on the psychology of Carl Jung to cross, in 60 days, exactly that border that most people spend their entire lives avoiding, the border between the mask and the truth. Every day you receive a short lesson with keys, a surgical question, a statement, and a micro-action to record in your journal. It is the practical path to individuation. It is the process of stopping being interpreted by your shadow and beginning to interpret it yourself. The link is in the first pinned comment. Go there now, read it carefully, and if you feel that this is the moment, leave a single word below. Escolho. It is not for me. It is a silent commitment to the part of you that has grown tired of pretending. Now let us look at the exact mechanism by which your mind manufactures suffering. Because understanding this mechanism is what separates the hostage from the observer. The human mind, when faced with any void of information, does one very specific thing. It fills it. It is not a conscious choice, it is an automatic function, almost like breathing. Where data is missing, it injects assumption. Where context is missing, it injects a plot. And, due to an ancient error in our own formation, the chosen plot tends to be the most threatening one possible. Someone takes a while to reply to a message. The fact is neutral. There is an interval between your message and the response. The mind does not accept this interval. It fills it, and it fills it with, he is angry, she has given up, he found a flaw in me. She has finally realized who I am underneath. You have already suffered through the entire fight before the other person has even opened their phone. You have already been rejected, judged, abandoned, and none of that left the room where you were sitting alone staring at a dark screen. Jung would explain this with an uncomfortable coldness. What the mind projects onto the silence of the other is rarely about the other. It is about the undigested material you keep inside. Whoever carries in the basement the silent certainty that they are unworthy of love projects lovelessness into every pause. Whoever carries the silent certainty that they are incompetent projects contempt into every more serious look from their boss. Whoever carries the silent certainty that they are a fraud projects suspicion into every compliment received, as if it were a trap before the blow. Projection is not a moral choice. It is a psychic economy. It is cheaper for the mind to cast its own painful content outward than to acknowledge it within. Putting the verdict into someone else's mouth is more tolerable than admitting that the verdict is yours against yourself. That is why most people do not fight with people. They fight with projections. And when you discover this, one part of you wants to laugh, another wants to cry. because it means that much of what hurt in a theater where you played every role. It is not X, it is Y. You are not afraid of what the other thinks of you. You are afraid of what you already think of yourself and have not had the courage to listen to without someone else's face as an intermediary. The other is merely the screen where the movie is projected. And as long as you try to fix the screen, the movie will remain the same. Notice how this changes everything. If most perceived threats are internal production, the way out is no longer to control the world, to please more, to explain yourself better, to anticipate everything. The way out becomes dismantling the factory, to go to the hidden room where the script is written and change the screenwriter. This is painful because for a while you will realize that much of your identity was built upon these scripts. You were the misunderstood one, the wronged one, the resilient one who endures in silence, the one who needs to try 10 times harder to be noticed. Without the script, who are you? It is this question without an immediate answer that most people avoid, and by avoiding it they remain haunted. Now we enter the part that almost all popular methods leave aside. You have learned that fear is an enemy, that it must be beaten, overcome, crushed, that you need to hold your head high, take a deep breath, and face it. Jung would have looked at this scene with that almost surgical silence and disagreed. Fear is not an enemy, it is a messenger. And, like every messenger, it only leaves when the message has been delivered. Fighting fear is like strangling the carrier pigeon so you don't have to read the letter. You eliminate the bearer, the information remains pending, and another pigeon will appear, more insistent, with a louder message. That is why those who simply try to stop being afraid end up trading their old fear for a new symptom. A poorly slept night, tension in the jaw, constant irritation, exhaustion without a cause, a strange urge to run away from everything on Sunday nights. The body refuses to forget what the consciousness insisted on ignoring. It is not X, it is Y. Fear does not weaken you. What weakens you is the energy spent avoiding looking at it. Keeping an emotion out of consciousness requires a silent vigilance that consumes you 24 hours a day. It is like holding a door shut with the weight of your own body while trying to work. Love, raise children, smile for photos, be productive, be kind, be an example. You become exhausted and do not know why. It is because a part of you is locking that door all the time, without rest, without vacations, without an audience. The Jungian inversion is elegant and uncomfortable. You do not need to fight fear. You need to stand in silence before it until it tells you what it represents. Fear is a symbol, not an attack. It points to a wound, to a memory, to a trampled value, to a part of you that was abandoned at a moment when it needed you and could not find you. Shedding light on this cause is not an emotional management technique. It is an act of responsibility over one's own history. And this is where many give up, because the moment you accept observing fear instead of fighting it, an annoying thing happens. It starts to speak, and what it says is not always what the conscious mind wants to hear. It says that that relationship has been dead for 2 years, and you remain there out of habit, that that job is a well-lit coffin, that that silence from your mother was never neutral, that that dream you abandoned at 19 still pulses, and it is it, not the economy, that keeps you awake at night. That is why almost no one listens to their own fear until the end, because listening until the end requires the courage to acknowledge that life will need to change, and changing is much more work than continuing to complain in silence. And it is exactly this point of recognition that the Código do Despertar was made to navigate with you, not in an inspired afternoon, in 60 days of silent, honest work, one step at a time, based directly on the work of Jung. If something in you has already understood that returning to autopilot is impossible, the link is in the first pinned comment. Go now. Each day delayed is another day serving a life that is not yours. Here is the core of the work, the point that separates those who have only heard of Jung from those who have truly understood Jung. There is a silent psychological law that almost no one wants to accept. What you reject within yourself earns the right to govern you from the outside. What is recognized loses power. What is denied gains territory. That is why the person most controlled by certain behaviors is precisely the one who swears, with honesty, that they would never do such a thing. The rigid moralist lives obsessed with what they condemn. The eternally strong live haunted by a fragility they refuse to name. The eternally calm carry a silent rage that only finds an outlet in disproportionate outbursts when no one is looking. The shadow is not a monster. It is a gathering of parts of you that were exiled too early to defend themselves. The curious child who was labeled inconvenient. The sensitive adolescent who was taught to swallow it. The ambitious adult who was convinced that wanting more is ugly. Each exile produced a ghost, and ghosts do not die because you changed houses, age, or spiritual discourse. They wait. They are patient. One day they reappear in the face of a boss, in the voice of a partner, in the expression of a child, and you react to that person with an intensity that reason cannot explain. It is not the person. It is the ghost wearing that person for an instant. Integrating the shadow is the opposite of destroying it. It is to stop treating it as an enemy and start treating it as a source. Buried anger, when acknowledged, ceases to be an explosion and becomes a boundary. Buried sadness, when acknowledged, ceases to be cold depression and becomes depth. Buried ambition, when acknowledged, ceases to be disguised envy and becomes direction. Buried desire, when acknowledged, ceases to be shame and becomes vitality. No energy within you is trash. Every rejected energy merely finds a crooked path to exist. It is not X, it is Y. Freedom is not the absence of fear. It is the integration of that which produced the fear. As long as a part of you is in exile, it will keep knocking on the door. Each knock you will call anxiety, a crisis, a bad omen, I don't know what is happening to me. This is what is happening. A part of you is asking to come home, and as long as you do not open the door, the noise gets louder. Notice what this means in practical life. The relationship you fear losing may be exactly the scenario where your abandoned shadow screamed the loudest. You repeat old patterns there not by chance, but because the unconscious always leads you back to the stage where the original play did not end. The job that suffocates you may be the exact place where a version of you, still a child, was taught to have value only for what you produce. The person who makes you lose your cool may carry unknowingly the face of someone who violated you from within decades ago. It is not a mystical coincidence. It is a precise signal from the psyche saying, here is where there is material to work with. Anyone who understands this stops treating life as a random battlefield and starts treating it as a laboratory. Each trigger becomes data. Each explosion becomes a map. Each fear becomes a door. And when you realize that almost all of your current problems are just repetitions organized for you to finally see what you have been avoiding, something breaks. Not on the outside, on the inside. It is the end of an ancient innocence. You stop being a victim of what you feel and become responsible for deciphering it. Responsibility here is not the same as guilt. Guilt is the mourning that the shadow uses to keep you stationary. Responsibility is the cold decision to look at your own material and work it with method. That is why Jung used the word work so much. Individuation is work. It is not a pretty weekend insight. It is not the euphoria of a retreat. It is a daily craft, almost monastic, done from within, without an audience, without applause, without a certificate. Now I'm going to give you the minimum structure. It is simple to describe and brutal to apply. In the face of any fear, ask 3 questions, not as a trick, but as a scalpel. First question, what exactly do I fear? Not a generic cloud, a specific event. The word fear of the future is too vague to be worked on. Fear of ending up alone at 60 in a small apartment, that is already an image. Fear of hearing from your father, before he dies, that he was never proud of you, that is already an image. Fear of the day when the person you love looks at you as if you had become scenery, that is already an image. The more specific the fear, the more visible it becomes. And what is visible can be interrogated. What is vague only haunts. Second question, does this fear belong to the present or is it a projection? Here you separate the real from the fabricated. If the scenario you fear is actually happening now with concrete evidence, it demands action. If it is being constructed within you without a solid foundation, it demands awareness, not action. Most people confuse the two. They act wildly upon projections and remain paralyzed before what is real. That is why they become exhausted. They spend energy on the phantom and postpone the decision before the fact. Third question, what about reality do I still not know? Every projection is born in a void of information. Not knowing what the other person thinks, what the company will decide, whether that medical exam will yield a good result, what comes after a difficult decision. Where there is a void, the shadow writes. Filling the void with data, when possible, dissolves a large part of the fictional production. And when it is not possible to fill it, only one mature path remains. Accepting that uncertainty is part of life and stopping the emotional reaction as if every doubt were a sentence. These three questions, asked with honesty on paper, transform an automatic reaction into a conscious understanding. Not because they are magical, but because they force the mind to leave the cloud and enter into precision. And the shadow loses much of its power the moment it loses the right to ambiguity. But here is the warning. Applying these questions once, in a moment of crisis, has limited value. Applying them as a daily practice, regarding small reactions, banal irritations, and subtle discomforts, is what transforms a man or woman into an observer of their own psyche. It is the difference between putting out a fire and learning to read the smoke. He who only puts out fires lives in urgency. He who reads the smoke acts before the flame. And if you have reached this point in the video, something in you has already understood that you can no longer treat your own mind like a locked room. O Código do Despertar was built precisely to transform these questions into a daily, guided practice over 60 days, based directly on the work of Carl Jung. It is not content to be accumulated. It is a structure to be traversed. The link is in the first pinned comment. You have two options, and both will be silent. Continue managing the same fear for the next few years, with increasingly sophisticated techniques to avoid looking it in the face. Or begin today the work of becoming the master of your own process. No one will see your decision, but you will live with it for the rest of your life. Now understand what is really at stake. The goal was never to live without fear. That is a childish fantasy sold by people who have not yet looked into their own basement. Fear is part of human matter. It has always been. It always will be. There is no lucid adult without fear. There is a lucid adult who has ceased to be its slave. The difference is not aesthetic. One lives reacting, the other lives choosing. One spends their entire existence making elegant excuses for a small life. The other feels the same fear and walks forward, because they understood where it comes from and where it points. One believes that courage is the absence of trembling. The other knows that courage is acting while trembling, without ceremony. It is not X, it is Y. You do not need to become fearless. You need to become conscious. Consciousness is the only solid ground that exists within a psyche. Everything else is mood, hormone, context. From the moment you recognize your own shadow, give a name to your own material. Listen to your own fear instead of running from it. Something silent changes. You stop being interpreted by your story and begin to interpret it. You become a reader of yourself. You become an author. You become, in the exact Jungian sense, an individual, not an acceptable mask, a whole person. And then fear loses its position. It stops being a tyrant and becomes a signpost. It stops ordering and starts informing. You continue to feel because you continue to be alive, but the command shifts inward. You stop asking the world if you are allowed to exist. You stop waiting for authorization from those who, in truth, also do not know what they are doing here. Now, without frills, you have two paths. You can close this video, go back to the messages on your phone, return to the same routine, feel the same old fear for the same old reasons, and call that life. No one will accuse you of anything. The world is made, in large part, of people who made exactly this choice and learned how to put makeup on it. Or you can accept that you heard it, and that hearing changes something. That returning to the point before this conversation is no longer possible. That pretending is now a more exhausting task than working. The guide is in the first comment. The illusion is over. Choose.